Welcome to CSI Chat, where every topic's fair game. From finance to mysteries, we'll never be the same. Our hosts an accountant with a knack for a joke. We'll dive into the details and laugh until we choke. CSI Chat, where the numbers beat the fun. We'll explore every subject under the sun.
Okay, well, we are very lucky today to be joined by Jeffrey Pfeffer, Professor Jeffrey Pfeffer. I'm going to give a little bit of background on Jeffrey before we get in. But Jeffrey is a professor of organizational behavior at the Graduate School of Business at Stanford University, where he has taught since 1979. He has authored or co-authored over 16 books on various business topics, including power, leadership, and career development. And most recently is the author of The Seven Rules of Power, surprising but true advice on how to get things done and advance your career. And Jeffrey, I've read the book, and it's an excellent read. And as I had mentioned, I wish in my younger days, I went to Stanford and I took your course, but as you articulated before, it's never too late. So I will go with that message. Now, as you know, as I talked about, I'm a Canadian, and we're going to get into this a little bit, but these rules that are outlined, they are not natural, I think, for people to first adopt them. So it's not necessarily things that are come to first nature. These are, as with a lot of skills, these have to be learned and practiced in order to be leveraged properly. But as a Canadian, I got to ask you if you've had any Canadians go through the halls of Stanford, and if you have any good examples of Canadians who have learned these rules and applied them in practice. Because as mentioned, I think the average Canadian, as I'm sure with the average American, it would take some time to learn them and apply them in practice. So any good examples of Canadians that you got at Stanford?
Well, actually, I have a relatively recent Canadian example. So there's he's a maxillofacial, and I'm sure I've mispronounced that, surgeon, who is actually head, I think, of the Department of Maxillofacial Surgery at McGill University.
Okay.
And practiced medicine for a number of years. I think he was born in the provinces of Canada, the eastern provinces. His name is Rene Casey, Caissie. And decided he had started an electronic health records company, an EHR company, while I was in Canada, which he sold to TELUS, which is, I believe, a Canadian company. And they, of course, did what large companies do when they buy small startups, they destroyed it. And anyway, so he moved to California. He decided he was going to come back and get a business degree. And so he entered the program at Stanford. We have a program which is called the MSX program, used to be called the Sloan program. It's a one-year Master of Science and Management program for older students. It's a full-time program. It's not the executive MBA program. It's a one-year program, full-time, as opposed to a two-year MBA program. And so he came to that program. And he took my class, and we became, over the years, extraordinarily good friends. He was, for instance, at my recent wedding. And the things that he practiced out of that class, there's Rule 5 in the 7 Rules of Power, is to network relentlessly. And Rene was going to start a company. It's called Metaloop, Medelloop, Metaloop, which is an artificial intelligence company that takes medical data and figures out diagnoses and helps people do research and helps people write grants. It is a truly fabulous product, which has enormous traction. And Rene, I think, is on the way to basically building a unicorn and making the company very valuable. He permitted me to be an investor on it. I'm on his advisory board, etc. But when he said, he looked at, I have visitors who come to almost every class, and he said, I'm going to be, at the end of every class, the first person in the front of the room. I'm going to meet every visitor at your class.
Wow.
And he can tell you how one of the visitors he met, Amir Rubin, Amir Rubin used to be the head of Stanford Healthcare, which is our hospital. Went on to run one medical, the chain of primary clinics. He's now a VC. Amir Rubin is an investor in Renee's company. On his board of directors, has opened 1,000 doors for Renee. It's just made him extremely successful. And so you say to Renee, I say to Renee, I said, when he put me on his advisory board, I said, you're a high-tech company. I can hardly use a cell phone. And he said, Jeffrey, you have been the most valuable person of all my advisors, because he said, you know everybody, and you've introduced me to people, including, of course, Amir, who has made he's made my company very successful. So I would say Renee has embraced the principles. Renee will come to my class this year. He was supposed to come last year, but his father died, I think, the day before. Unfortunately, he was scheduled to appear in the class, so he was in Canada for that. But other than that, he will be at the class. He and I get together for lunch about once a month or so, and I think he has definitely embraced the principles. He is networking relentlessly. He is, I think, using many of these things to manage his board. I think it's fine, even though he's a Canadian.
He's applied it.
He's applied it, absolutely.
And we're going to get into this, Jeffrey, but since you brought it up first, the networking relentlessly is by far my favorite of the 7 rules. And we're gonna touch on them, but I just want to bring this up to you now. Do you think that is the most? It's really a kind of a 2-part question. Do you have to apply all 7 of these rules, and do you think if you were to pick favorites, would networking relentlessly be the most important of the 7 rules?
So the answer to the second question is certainly no. The most important of the 7 rules is actually the first rule: get out of your own way. Because if you think about it, in order for you to network relentlessly, you have to be willing to get out of your comfort zone. Most people, because in order to network relentlessly effectively, you cannot spend all your time with people that you know well and that are your friends and family. Because the problem with people that you know well and your friends and family is that the people that you know well, that you work with all the time, know probably the same people and the same things that you do. And so therefore your networking is not as useful. So therefore you have to, the most important ties are weak ties. The most important people for you to meet are people that you don't know well. The most important people for you to network with are people who know things that are different than what you know. Because if you only network with people who know the same things you do, you don't learn anything from them, because, so therefore the most important rule, I think, is rule 1, to get out of your own way, to be willing to get out of your comfort zone, to be bolder than you thought you could be, to be more ambitious than you thought you could be, possibly, to use a word that sometimes used, or you're a little more aggressive than you thought you could be. So I don't think it was natural for Renee, even though he's charming and obviously smart, I don't think it was natural for Renee to say, I'm going to be the first person at the front of that room and meet all these people. I don't think that was a natural behavior for him. So for him to engage in the networking behavior, he had to say, I'm going to do things. I'm going to be different than I customarily would be.
Got it. So let's take a step back. You've been researching power for a while. How did you first come, of all the things you could kind of focus on in organizational behavior, how did you land at researching power and how that, the origins of power and how to get it?
My dear friend, Bob Sutton, who's a much more successful author than me because he wrote the famous book, The No Asshole Rule, has once called me the master of the obvious. And I think that's exactly correct. My success has been finding things that are important but unexplored, and seeing things that that are once obvious once they're pointed out, but are not so obvious until they've been pointed out. And so when I began researching and teaching about power many years ago, there were no courses, there were no electives on power. John Cotter started his elective at Harvard Business School the same year I started mine at Stanford. 1979, as you pointed out. When you read books on management and leadership. The word power was seldom mentioned. And if it was mentioned, it was mentioned in terms of French and Raven's 5 bases of power. People did not really spend much time teaching about power, even though it was pretty obvious if you looked at the world. I mean, it's not like suddenly power became more important. Power was always important. Nobody basically was teaching about it. So to me, my job is very much like a company. I mean, a company, what does a company do? A company finds a need and fills it. I find gaps in what is being taught, gaps in the research literature, gaps that need to be filled, questions that need to be asked and answered, and try to ask and answer them. So that's how I got into it and why I got into it.
So let's just start with the definition. How do you define power? What's your definition, Jeffrey, of power?
Power is your ability to get your way against opposition. And there's just been a recent book review in the New York Times which speaks to this issue. I think people expect organizations are interdependent systems. In order for you to get things done, other people have to collaborate and cooperate with you. And those other people are going to have their own objectives. They're going to have their own KPIs. They're going to have their own sources of information that may be different from you. And so disagreement is endemic. If the disagreement is not rare, the idea that you and I would disagree, not at all unusual. We come from different countries. We may have different experiences. We may be trying to do different things, etc.
Yep.
And so disagreements are endemic in organizations. And therefore, power is the ability for you to have your view of what should be done prevail.
And if we take two different things here, is happiness correlated in the same way as power? More power means more happiness. Is it that simple?
No, because power, in the book that I wrote before this, which is called Power, Why Some People Have It and Others Don't, I have a chapter in there called The Price of Power. Power comes with a price. You're under public scrutiny, you're more visible. The higher you rise, the more people are watching everything you do. The higher you rise, the more people want your job, the more competition there is. Nobody fights to be at the bottom, people fight to be at the top. So there's a price of power. So power doesn't necessarily bring you happiness.
And what about, do you correlate money with power? More money equals more power. Some of the most powerful people in the world are politicians. You take even like some of these powerful politicians, we look up their annual salaries, they wouldn't be the highest, they wouldn't compare to the CEOs of the world. How do you correlate those two, money and power, Jeffrey? Are those two correlated together?
They're definitely correlated. I have a friend who I had on the Pfeffer on Power podcast when I still did Pfeffer on Power podcast, named Michael Gruen. Michael Gruen said to me, if you have to choose between power and money, pick power. Power will get you money. Money will not necessarily get you power.
Do you agree with?
Absolutely. Watch. Just look at President Trump. Somebody I just read an article, I think over the weekend, that's again in the New York Times, it said, he basically has made his family or himself $3 billion since becoming president.
Yeah. Well, and that's somebody who was, independently wealthy before presidency. Again, you probably, so he's taken it to another level. You look at some of the other one, like Barack Obama and some of the others who maybe weren't, their lives pre-presidency and post-presidency are quite different. So I think, again, there's probably a number of examples where that plays, is true. When I read your book, there's this old saying of nice, do nice guys always finish last? And I was reading your book and saying, man, if you don't follow these rules, you might be the nice guy that finishes last. Do you agree with that? Like, do you see it the same way, Jeffrey, in terms of, that's kind of one of the things that I was thinking, I was going through your book saying, it's almost like, this kind of proves the point that if you're just going to be nice to everybody, you might not land in the right spot.
So first of all, there is in fact a research study, which I cite in the book, entitled do nice guys and gals actually finish last? And the answer to that is yes. The penalty for agreeableness is actually higher for men than for women, because men are not necessarily expected to be agreeable. But when I think about what I recommend you do, to me, I don't think any of this is not being nice. I don't think being ambitious is not necessarily being not nice. I don't think networking is not, networking has nothing to do with niceness. Building a brand has nothing to do with niceness. Acting and speaking with power has, I think, nothing to do with niceness. I mean, people see this as me telling people to be mean, nasty assholes, but I don't see that way at all. I mean, getting out of your own way, not carrying around a set of adjectives that disempower you, not trying to fulfill everybody else's expectations for you, not letting other people define what you're going to be and able to be because of your race or gender or national origin or whatever. I don't think any of that has to do with being nice or not. It has to do with, I think, being agentic. It has to do with being efficacious. It has to do with understanding how to get other people to do what you need and want them to do. But I don't think it has anything to do, to me, niceness and this, there are powerful people who are nice. There are powerful people who aren't nice. It's, I think, a very orthogonal dimension.
Well, and I think you share a number of examples in your book where somebody comes up with an idea and somebody else steals it. And if you're that person who came up with that idea and someone else steals it and takes credit for it, you might at that point realize that, what, maybe I got to change course and take ownership and promote my own idea. But those are the best examples. To me, that's terrible that somebody would do that. But again, the reality is it happens on a regular basis in the, in the world, which is, fairness does not define success at the end of the day.
That's correct.
The other thing I want to ask you, Jeffrey, is we're taught at an early age that nothing beats hard work. And I think I know how you're going to answer this question, but I'm going to ask you to it anyway, is that can we succeed in this world with hard work alone? That if we just put our heads down and work, 14, 15, 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, that'll get us to where we want to get to? Or is, again, you can't do it like that. It's focused hard work is maybe the better, the better approach.
Well, I would use the word noticed. I mean, if you do hard work and nobody notices it, what's the old saying? If a tree falls in the forest, if nobody hears it, does the sound even exist? So if your hard work is not noticed by somebody, if it is not, if you don't do something to get the attention for what you're doing and for what you're contributing, your boss is not necessarily looking at you and worrying about what you're doing and what you're accomplishing. So you need to make sure that people know about your hard work. So hard work by itself, if that hard work is not noticed, it's not going to do you any good at all.
Yeah. So the book advertises 7 rules. Now, 7 is an interesting number. There's 5, like top 5. There's like, top 3, top 10. You landed on 7 as your rules. There must have been more, presumably more that you had to whittle down to 7. Give us some background on how you landed on 7. How'd you get to 7 rules, Jeffrey?
7, I kind of figured out what I wanted to talk about, and I figured at the end there were 7 of them. It turns out there's 7 C's. There's the 7 wonders of the world. 7 is there's an article entitled "The Magic Number 7 Plus or Minus 2." It turns out people can remember about 7 things plus or minus 2. Robert Greene wrote an interesting book called The 48 Laws of Power. You can now remember 48 things. You probably can't even remember 10. My friend Gary Loveman, when he ran Harrah's, which then changed his name to Caesars, the casino company, when he did management training, he started by asking people to write down the 10 commandments. He said it turns out that most of them couldn't do it. They can only remember what they were most challenged by. But at any rate, his point was that 10 is a big number. And that you need to focus on smaller number than 10. I think 7's a good number.
And what was the research involved to come up with the 7? Was this just Is this years of experience, Jeffrey, or did it come together a lot quicker that when you started to dig into this, the 7 really jumped out right away?
Well, as you have pointed out, I've written a bunch of books, and I've written 4 books on power, maybe 5, depending upon how you count them. And so I've written earlier books on power. Um, and so when I decided to write this book, I basically tried to do what all my editors over the years have told me to do, which is to simplify it and shorten it. People don't read as long as much as they used to. It needs to be simplified. It needs to be memorable. It needs to encapsulate the main points. And so I figured out that these 7 rules, I think, have encapsulated pretty much what I saw a successful executives, both in all spheres of life, doing. And so the 7 seemed like the right number.
Now, do the 7 work in all circumstances? Like, would you say, again, based on your experience, is that these 7 rules would work in, and I don't even want to just limit it to corporate life, but, call it professional life. Do the 7 work in all circumstances, or do you think you have to read them and you have to say, you know what, of these 7, maybe only some of them would apply in my circumstances? I'm just wondering how they apply against, perhaps different cultures, perhaps different companies, different people. I'm just wondering how broadly those 7 apply.
So I believe they apply quite generally. And that's because humans are humans. You could be Japanese or Chinese or Himalayan or Malaysian or, South African or whatever. But people are people. The dynamics inside of in the dynamics of social life are actually quite similar. And they are similar, but not only across cultures, but they're very similar over time. And so I think these rules are pretty general. I don't see circumstances in which they would not apply. They even apply apparently to Canadians.
Do they apply in your personal life, Jeffrey? Do you apply them at home as well to your kids, your significant other, your family members, or are they strictly for professional life only?
Well, some people say I should write a marriage manual based upon the 7 rules of power, which I'm not going to do. So I will not answer that question. But I think they apply. I think they apply generally in social situations, not just in business, but in community groups and voluntary organizations, etc. Because in any situation in which there are multiple people interacting, there will be different perspectives, there will be disagreements, different people will have different information and different points of view, and those differences need to get resolved.
So people might be listening saying, okay, let's go. List me off these 7 rules. We're going to put them in place ASAP. The reality is that it's not so easy to just adopt them, because the first thing you're going to realize when you go through them is they may run a little bit counterintuitive to some of maybe what we were taught in school about the importance of, following rules and, and things on those lines. So just give us some perspective on why, at least on first blush, people may push back a little bit on these 7 rules.
I think you already hit on one reason. Well, one reason is that people were told, and particularly I think this is true in certain cultures. Asian cultures, I'm told, are like this, etc. Many people are told, don't stand out. Don't stand out. You don't want to, draw attention to yourself. You want to kind of, keep your head down, work hard, do a good job, and everything will be fine. And you certainly don't want to draw attention to yourself. And so and that's a rule that I think, or that's a prescription for not getting very far. But people are taught that. People are taught about the virtues of modesty. Even though, when I look at the people who are in the news all the time, they don't strike me as excessively modest. I don't think Elon Musk and modesty not been often used in the same sentence. So I think people are taught. I think people are taught the virtues. And the question I would ask about the virtues is: there any social science that supports their utility? And if there isn't, maybe you need to look at something other than the virtues that you're taught to be modest, to be self-effacing, take care of others, et cetera, et cetera. If you don't take care of yourself, other people aren't likely to take care of you.
I and yeah, and you're more likely to be taken advantage of. Again, you definitely have to look out for yourself. So if we talk about the 7 rules, we talked a little bit earlier about is one, more important than the other. You talked about the first one. Are they ranked in order of importance, Jeffrey, the 7 rules, or are they not ranked in order of importance?
I think I think they're ranked not necessarily in order of importance, but they're ranked in. I think the first rule is probably the most important. You have to get on it.
You have to accept the reality of the corporate world that these rules don't run necessarily intuitive to how you grew up and what you were taught earlier on. But the best way forward is really to just forget all of that and move forward. Would that be fair?
I think that's exactly right. And you have to stop. You have to stop doing things that disempower you, like saying, I'm going to worry about what Scott thinks about me. So therefore, if Scott expects me to be, quiet and modest, I need to be quiet and modest because I need to make sure that he likes me. I think we over process on being liked. Though, but at the end of the day, nobody hires you because they like you. They hire you because they actually think you can do something. They actually think you can accomplish something. You're hired.
Absolutely.
You're hired for a mission. You're hired to get something done. And so you were like willing to, you have to be willing to do what's necessary to get things done.
Now, what if I come to you and say, Jeffrey, look, I like rules, 1, 3, 4, and 5. I'm not a big fan of the others. Therefore, I'm just going to follow 4 of the 7. Are you cool with that approach? Or you say, look, it's you either go 7 for 7 or just don't even read the book.
No, I would say you can do whatever you want.
Because in some cases, in some cases, it's one thing to get people to change their behavior, but it's another thing where you're getting people to just do things that they're completely not comfortable with. You know what I mean? I'm just wondering if there's any of them where people just say, like, look, it's just not in my DNA to do that at all. Therefore, I'm going to, do you run into that at all or not really?
So when I teach my class, both online and on campus, I have a set of executive coaches who work with the class. And the reason why I have executive coaches to work with the class is to help people, so to speak, get out of their comfort zone and do stuff that they originally thought they couldn't do. To use an analogy, which I often use in the first day of class, you were not born walking, talking, or using the toilet. And you learned to do all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And people are not born playing the French horn or the piano or playing tennis or playing golf or playing pickleball or whatever you're doing. We learn things over time. And when we learn things, we are not necessarily proficient at them, and they are not necessarily comfortable. The first time you speak a foreign language, it is not comfortable. The first time you walked, you probably fell on your butt, or something. The first time you tried to speak a foreign language, it was probably extremely uncomfortable and you were not very proficient at it. So our life, at least life as a human being, is about mastering things that were initially not easy for you to do. That's what learning is. So the idea that you can learn power and everything has to be comfortable. I don't think anybody was comfortable the first time they tried to swing at a golf ball. I don't think anybody was necessarily comfortable the first time they tried to, play a musical instrument or something. So the idea that everything has to be comfortable in order for you to do it, I think is just insane. Because our life is filled with mastering things that initially weren't comfortable.
Yeah, no, I agree. You're 100% right. I totally agree with that. How do these 7 rules line up with running a successful company? You shared a great example in your book that stood out to me. I think you were a board member at a certain company, and the topic was succession planning, and there was a strong CEO in place. And I think you had noted that he or she, whoever it was, had a number of really good second and third in commands, but they wouldn't stay very long. and they would go on to other places, maybe because again they weren't able to rise up. And that, although might be something that is consistent with the seven rules of power, that company itself who let those folks go, they are probably worse off by those people not being involved in the company than if they were there. Because I actually really like that example you shared in the book on this issue of succession planning. I'm just wondering from your perspective, Jeffrey, on how do the rules line up? Do they line up with the playbook of running a successful company, or do you think there's some differences there?
I'm sure there are some differences. So one of the things that I say to people, the correlation between your success and your company's success, unless you own a lot of the company, is probably not that high. The example I sometimes use is a guy named Stan O'Neill. In 2008, Stan O'Neill was the CEO of Merrill Lynch, the stock brokerage firm. Merrill Lynch was very badly hurt by the financial crisis, bought by the Bank of America. Stan O'Neill walked away with an exit package of about $160 million. Merrill Lynch laid off a lot of people. Was Stan O'Neill a successful executive? If you're Mr. and Mrs. O'Neill, he was very successful. If you're a Merrill Lynch employee, you're not so much. Elon Musk is today trying to get $1 billion pay package. Tesla's profits and earnings are going the wrong direction. The correlation between your success and your company's success, the correlation between CEO compensation and company success, relatively low. Every year when the list of executive pay comes out, people say, oh my goodness, there's no much relationship between company success and CEO pay. I guess we need to be reminded of that every year. Your success and the company's success are not the same thing. On the very first day of class, I tell my students, most of the classes at Stanford Business School tell you how to build a successful company. This is a class about how to make you successful.
Got it. Yeah, well, and you do share a lot of stories in there about entrepreneurs as well, using these powers to, like, again, you led with a great story of the Canadian doctor who has built his company through leveraging those seven powers. There obviously is some consistencies there,
Of
but
course.
but there's not, it's not all consistent. Like, again, I think I think that's very well said. Now, you mentioned rule number one as being the most important. Get out of your own way. You've already talked a little bit about it, but when you say you need to get out of your own way, Jeffrey, what do you mean? This is just, kind of forget what we previously learned and just try and read this book with an open mind. Is that kind of where we're getting at?
I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it is just to forget about, don't let other people define what you can and can't do. Don't try to control, don't worry about being liked. Don't worry about, don't carry around descriptions of yourself that disempower you. So people come to me all the time and they say, I'm a woman, or I'm Asian, or I'm an immigrant, or I'm a brown person working in Australia, the Indian working in Australia. And I say, I'm sure you're a brown person working in Australia. Don't think of yourself that way. Think of yourself as, the professional, highly skilled professional that you are. Think of yourself using adjectives that empower rather than disempower you. So I would say, you need to believe you deserve the job that you're trying to get.
So really what one of the messages of the book in this particular rule is really, projecting confidence in everything you do.
Absolutely.
And why is it important? Like, why is it important to really project confidence in everything you do, especially in your business dealings?
Because as a Berkeley professor, Cameron Anderson has demonstrated in a series of studies, confidence is often confused with competence. If you want to appear competent, you have to act confident.
If you want to appear competent, you have to act confident. And would you say that a lot of the people who act confident aren't actually competent as well? That the reverse, like, Does the confidence really just trump competency at the end of the day as well?
Absolutely, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And what are some of the tips to always appear confident, would you say?
Um, you know, I think making eye contact. I think speaking in a loud voice. I think, making declarative statements, not asking questions. I feel like you know what you're doing.
So then we move on to rule two. Now, we're not going to go through all the rules. I've tried to pick some of the ones that I think would be fun to talk about. But rule number two, which is breaking the rules.
That's correct.
What do you mean by breaking the rules? Give us some background into this rule.
Right. I think people are told to stay in their lane, wait your turn, um, don't be too pushy, don't, all kinds of social norms and expectations. Um, I think if you want to get things done, you don't want to adhere to all of these social conventions and norms and expectations. I think you catching people by surprise is useful because power is associated with rule breaking. So Dutch academics did this fabulous study entitled "Breaking the Rules to Rise to Power," and because power is associated with the ability to not conform to what other people expect you to do, the reverse is also true. If you don't conform to what other people expect, you will, in fact, be perceived as more powerful.
And you have a lot of really good examples in the book because you think about breaking the rules. We're not talking about necessarily breaking the law. Like not necessarily that.
No,
But
you could
but
be. No, you
yeah,
could be talking about breaking the law.
you
Look,
do share some example. Yeah, you do. Yeah.
look. When Martin Luther King was engaging in the sit-ins in the South to try to change the segregation that kept African Americans out of many spheres of public life, he in fact was breaking the law.
Yeah.
When they did the sit-in in the Woolworths counters, he was breaking the law. Nelson Mandela became the father of South Africa while he was in fact in prison, breaking
Yep.
the laws of apartheid.
Yep.
I mean, laws favor those that made them. And if you're going to create social change, you may not only have to break rules, you may actually have to break laws.
I agree with those examples. And I guess my point was that you had a lot of other really good subtle examples in your book as well about saying, look, to attend this fancy dinner, you have to be, so and so. And people would just, say, you know what, I'm going to try and attend without necessarily invite. And the reality is that, more often than not, it would probably work out. And the downside of going is relatively low. Like presumably you would have countless examples of people doing more subtle things as well,
Right.
in addition to the extreme ones where it can really work out in your favor.
Absolutely. I mean, you don't get what you don't ask for. And so you need to be a little bolder than you might otherwise be. And not necessarily wait your turn or not necessarily defer to people who tell you what you can and can't do.
Why do you think, in our educational system, again, we talked a lot about, a lot of it is following rules. Why do you think that is then, Jeffrey? You would have thought that maybe a better way to educate folks is to be a little bit more open-minded and maybe not have so many, strict rules. Why do you think the education system, especially in the younger, with the elementary and high school, is so much more focused on rule following as perhaps something might be better, which is not rule breaking, I guess, is really what this boils down to.
I think it's easier for you to be a teacher. It's easier for you to be a leader if everybody does what you tell them to do. I mean, that's the simplest answer. It's just easier for you. Your job is easier if everybody does what you tell them.
Yeah. So my favorite rules are certainly number 4 and number 5, which is, building a powerful brand and networking relentless. Those are, from my perspective, those are definitely my two favorites. Let's start with powerful brand. What is a powerful brand for an individual? How would you define that?
I think everybody has a set of background and experiences and education that has, and in life that has made them uniquely qualified to do something. So, we talk about product market fit. Does the product fit the market? And I think I think we see that pretty clearly in the case of, products. But I think it's true for individuals as well. Do you fit the job to which you aspire? Do you fit the job that you want to do? Does your life experience make you in some way more qualified than other people to do that job? You have a set of experiences that you can bring to that job. And then you need to tell people what those experiences are. You need to tell people who you are in a way that defines you. You are, to give you a concrete example. I had a student. I have during my class. We have them. I have my students write a brand statement, and then I will call on them randomly. So one year I called on this guy, and happened to be an African American. He said, "I'm a doctor," which I, by the way, didn't know. He said, I have a medical degree. I came to Stanford Business School. He said, I came from St. Louis. And in the St. Louis, the African American community is very disadvantaged, and the health outcomes are bad. I went to medical school to learn how to make people healthier, and I went to business school to learn how to build organizations that to bring medical care to these underserved communities. And there it was. My experience as an African American, St. Louisan, who've gone to these schools, makes me uniquely both sensitive to and qualified to deal with this particular problem. And what was interesting is that, number one, most of the students in that class, including his classmates, did not know all of this. And once he shared it, people can help him. If I don't know who you are and what you're trying to do, it's going to be, most people are pretty bad mind readers. It's going to be very hard for them to say, oh, I know somebody who can help you. Or I have some piece of information that can help you. Or I know a charitable foundation that could be helpful, or whatever. So to the extent that you have a brand, it helps attract people who can be helpful.
And how do you build your brand without kind of, upsetting the higher ups? Like there's one example again would be somebody who all they do is talk about themselves. You know what I mean? And at some point you're probably pushing your boss to say, you know what, maybe this isn't the right fit. Like, is there a right balance between promoting your ideals, promoting your brand versus going too far? Do you think there's a balance to be said there?
I'm sure you can always go too far, but most people don't go far enough. And so that's why I push people to go farther than they're comfortable going, because most people don't go nearly far enough. Most people don't know what the limits are because they never push those limits.
And it goes to everything, I guess, in terms of how you speak, how you dress, how you present yourself, your mannerisms, all of that stuff forms part of your brand. Like, do you have tips on all, like, is it really just practicing some of those elements to make sure that, again, you're aware that people are paying attention to everything?
That's exactly correct. And as you described that, what you described is, of course, being thoughtful, being strategic, not just randomly putting on clothes or randomly, showing up at various things or randomly doing anything, but being thoughtful about how you present yourself and being thoughtful about what is the brand that you're trying to project and how would you go about projecting.
Got it. So the next one is networking relentlessly. How do you define networking relentlessly? You have tons of really good examples in the book on how to effectively network relentlessly. Maybe give us some examples on how best to do this.
I think the first thing you would need to do is, and I have my students do this as an exercise, is to say, name 10 people, which if they knew about you and you had some kind of relationship with them, would be useful for getting things done that you want to get done. Maybe useful for your career, maybe useful for some project that you're working on, maybe useful for launching a company, whatever. And then figure out how you're going to meet those people. Be thoughtful. Are you going to go to conferences with them? If you go to the conferences, what are you going to do to meet them? If you email them or if you reach out to them, how are you going to build a relationship? How can you be useful to them? How can you be helpful? How can you be interesting? How can you be whatever?
And what can you tell us about human nature? Like when you ultimately connect with that person, because one thing they might say is, well, why would they want to meet with me? You know, like that, because especially if you're younger or earlier on in your profession, you're probably looking to network with folks who maybe are more experienced with you, more experienced than you, excuse me. And maybe just tell us a little bit about human nature. Is that for the most part, do humans want to help other humans, or
Yes,
you know,
humans certainly want to help other humans. But even if you're more senior, you may have children who have issues, or you may have, um, you may be involved in some kind of organization where you can use help, or not nobody knows everything, and so it's interesting. I can remember a woman from Colombia who was organizing. Stanford has these global study trips that she was going to helping organize a trip of students over spring break to South America, including to Colombia. And I said to her, when you call to set up meetings with these companies, who are you talking to? And she says, I'm talking to the assistants. I looked at her and shook my head. Anyway, I said, why are you wasting this opportunity? I said, do you want to go back to Colombia? She said, yes, that's my plan, actually. I'm not one of those people going to stay in Northern California like everybody else. I actually want to go back to my country. I want to go back to Colombia. I said, what a wonderful opportunity to meet with CEOs. And she said to me, I don't know what to talk about. And I looked at her and I said, CEOs in Colombia, they probably think Stanford is like the moon.
Absolutely.
What is this place? What's going on? She said, why don't you talk to them about what's going on at Stanford? Why don't you tell them about the MBA culture? Why don't you tell them about what you're learning in the classes? Why don't you anyway? So she said, anyway. So I said, so, when are you making your next call? She said, I'm making one actually this afternoon. I said, well, I'm going to call on you tomorrow to find out what you did. And the next day, she said, he forced me to do it. I said to the assistant, I want to talk to the CEO. She said, actually talk to the CEO. We had a wonderful conversation. It turns out it was much easier than I thought. There you go.
Well, again, I agree with you. You mentioned Stanford University already. It's jumping off the top of the page, right? So that's totally, again, it just goes back to building a brand, right?
And MBA in the United States and Northern California. She could talk to people of all kinds. I mean, and you did not get into Stanford because whatever. I mean, these are all obviously talented people who've done things in their lives. Talk to people about what you've done. Talk to people about what you've learned from the experiences that you've had.
So as we get to the end here, Jeffrey, now the question is, how do we go about implementing these rules? And again, I would recommend you read Jeffrey's book. He's got a number of very effective ways to implement these rules. He's also got some very good advice on career coaches, and including career coaches who you should fire immediately. Some good examples on there. But just, Jeffrey, as a starting point, how does the group go and start implementing these rules in your book?
Well, to what we've talked about doesn't feel natural. Get help. And the help doesn't have to be a professional executive coach, though it could be. The help could be friends, colleagues, create a personal board of directors. But, I think humans are social creatures, and I think we do things more effectively when we get other people involved in helping us, giving us advice, number one, and number two, holding us accountable. And so when if if your goal is to lose weight, or if your goal is to get more fit, you're going to hire probably a personal trainer. Why? What you do with the personal trainer, you could in theory do without the damn personal trainer.
Absolutely.
With the thing that you do at your Weight Watchers group, you could do without the Weight Watchers group. Why do you go to Weight Watchers? Why do you go to a personal trainer? Because it turns out that when other people are there and you're visible to these other people and they're helping you become accountable for doing things, for taking action, for changing your habits, for changing how you eat, for changing how you take care of yourself, for changing how you spend your time, et cetera, et cetera. It's true in this domain as well. You need, if you others can help hold you accountable. Others can help give you advice. Others can help give you encouragement. Others can help you when you're facing setbacks and reversals, just as they do in every other sphere of your life.
Well, I love the examples in your book where the students kind of got together and formed their own group to, and I think, they would pick like one rule and say, okay, how do we implement that rule? How do we implement the next rule? And it's an easy way to do it, right? It's not rocket science. And you mentioned it's potentially a good idea to get a career coach. Give us a couple characteristics of a good career coach. You have some examples of some bad ones in your book as well. But give us some examples of one or two characteristics of a good career coach.
A good career coach on power is somebody who's comfortable with this, who doesn't try to coach you away from all of this stuff, which many of them will do. That's for me, number one. And number two, a good career coach will meet you where you are and help get you better than you thought you could be. And they do very much like a good personal trainer. If you go to the gym and the personal trainer says, what is the lowest weight you comfortably can lift? And that's the weight we're going to lift all the time. That's not a very good trainer. And with a good career coach will gently push you to do more than you thought you could do and encourage you, very much like a personal trainer will do.
Got it. And as we now wrap up, what's next on the list? You've written a lot about power, and is there a next book in the hopper, next project in the hopper? Is it going to be on power, or is it going to be something else coming down the pipe?
The next project is going to be on the U.S. healthcare system and how employers could fix the U.S. healthcare system if they held the vendors, and particularly the health insurance companies, accountable and measured their performance.
How did you get crossed like that? That doesn't sound necessarily consistent to what you've taught and everything like that over the years, right? Like that sounds is this more of like a personal project, or does this actually go back to your teachings and things along those lines?
This goes back to the fact that, I sit on the Stanford Committee for Faculty and Staff Human Resources, which helps us purchase our health insurance. And I just look at these companies and I look at what they do on a daily basis, which I'm sure every listener, not so much in Canada, because Canada has a different healthcare system, but in the U.S. with these employer-based healthcare systems administered by Anthem and United Healthcare and CVS Caremark, which bought Aetna. These are organizations that should not exist. They're intermediaries that get in the way and cause all kinds of all they do is basically increase costs. So I'm trying to, but the fault is not theirs. The fault is the employers who do not measure them and hold them accountable. And without measurement, without accountability, performance is going to be pretty bad, which it is. So that's my next project.
What's the ETA of the book? Do you have an ETA?
I have no idea. We've got a bunch of, I and a colleague who I was working with on this, Sarah Singer from Stanford Medical School, we have a bunch of co-authored papers that have already appeared, and we're still continuing to do our research. So the book will come out, I don't know, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Got it. Well, Jeffrey, thank you very much for joining us today. We very much appreciate you taking the time. I would highly encourage everybody to take to read the book. One of the things that you're going to realize is that when they talk about most important classes to take at Stanford, Jeffrey's class is right there on the top of the list. And I would encourage everybody to take a read of the book. But Jeffrey, thank you very much for taking the time. We really very much appreciate it.
Well, Scott, it's been a pleasure getting to know you, even informally, in this little hour-long thing.
Great. Thank you.
All right, be well.